Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to be covering SSH enumeration. So in the last video we performed an Nmap scan on our Archaeopteryx level 1, and over the next several videos we're going to kind of go down some common ports and services and just kind of enumerate those and see what the process would be to figure out if we can find any vulnerabilities. So we'll do that with a couple different machines so we can cover all of the services. So the first one today is going to be SSH. So let's go ahead and hop on our Kali box. And here are the results of my scan. So in the last video I told you that we would cover the scan more in detail of how I do my stage scans. So my scan was an Nmap, right? And then we had a capital P lowercase n. So that is treating the host as it's up, or saying let's not ping that host. We have an SS, that is a stealth scan. We've covered that one. So this stats every 3 minutes here. That's just a way of saying verbosity or verbose. So instead of a switch of V, we can specify how often we want to see information come back. So I chose 3 minutes here. For max retries, this is how much we're going to retry the scan. So we're only going to try the scan once. If the host isn't up, we're going to give up on the scan. And then we have a max scan delay here. So scan delay causes Nmap to wait a specific period of time before each probe it sends out. So we do this in case there's rate limiting. For example, if a machine was only allowing one ICMP packet a second, which is kind of common, any additional probes that we would send out in that time period would be lost. So what we're doing is we're letting Nmap pick the scan delay, and we're choosing the scan delay up to a value of 20 here. So the lower we go, the more likely it is that we're going to get rate limited. And same thing here, we're doing defeat RST rate limit. So as we discussed with the stealth scan, when we send a three-way handshake, right, we send the SYN, we get a SYN ACK back, and then we're not going to ACK back to them. We're actually going to just send an RST or get an RST. So if we get too many RSTs in a short period of time, or we send too many RSTs in a short period of time, that could be rate limited. So what would happen then is it could either show the scan or the port. It's going to show the port is filtered if we set a defeat RST rate limit, but it's not going to necessarily show it as closed. So if we don't get that RST in, we're going to see it as maybe filtered if it's being rate limited. So the port may or may not be open. It's likely that you're not going to run into many filtered ports, but if you do run into one, then you might want to check again and see if your scan was maybe rate limited, maybe scan just that port. It's a possibility. So that's kind of why we put that in there. So we have T4, which is the intensity of 4, and we're scanning all ports here. And then we're putting our output to an Nmap, and I just called it Archaeopteryx1.txt, and that's this here. And then I scanned the IP address that we found last time, so it's this 134.131. So we found a few open ports here, and if you'll notice something, my scan only took 1.82 seconds. So this is stage 1, right? With stage 1, we're just scanning and finding basic information. So instead of scanning all 65,535 ports and trying to find information on those, we're just scanning and saying, hey, what's open? So we've got these requests here, these SYN ACKs back, right? And we sent the RST, and we were confirming that these are actually open. So what we're going to do then is we're going to run a second scan. And this is going to be our more detailed scan here. So if you see, we're running Nmap, and here we can combine a little bit here. So if we're running an NVV, as you know, the V's are for verbosity, so we're saying we want some verbosity here. And with the N, I'm just saying disable reverse DNS resolution because we don't need that. So it just saves a little bit of time there. We've got the PN, which we're familiar with. So SSV here, if you combine the little s with the big S or the little s with the big V, you've got version scanning or stealth scanning here. So just a way to shorten it up a little bit, just showing you a different way of doing it. It's completely acceptable to split this out and have a little s big S and a little s big V. Either way you want to do it is completely fine. So for ports here, I picked the ones that we found in our last scan. So we're only scanning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ports here. So we can confirm that. So we're only scanning what we found, right? So now we're going to do an intense scan here with the A, right? We're going to scan everything that we can find on it. And we're only going to do it against 6 ports. So it's going to take a lot less time than if we're doing against 65,000 ports. So this version intensity here, this is just going to allow us to identify a service. So we have a choice between 0 and 9, with 9 being the most intense. So the higher that we pick, the more intense that we pick, the more likely we can identify a service, but the longer it's going to take to do that. So the scan might take a little bit longer, but we're okay with that because we want to find as much information as we can. And we're only scanning against 6 ports, so it's not going to take that long. So then we have our output here and our IP address. So we're familiar with that as well. So if we scan down, let's see how long this took. 267 seconds. That's not terrible. So what, a little under 5 minutes? That's not bad at all. So if we look here, what I like to do when I look at these scans is I kind of like to go down the ports and see if there's anything interesting in what I might attack first. And you might get your own methodology here. For the purpose of this course, we're just going to kind of go down the list here and cover those. But I might start with 443, or I might start with 139. So usually 80 and 443 might be something interesting. If they're hosting a web server, that's really interesting to me. If they're hosting Samba shares, 139 or 445, that's really interesting to me as well. So you're going to find a lot of vulnerabilities with Samba, and we'll cover that later. And you're going to find a lot of vulnerabilities with web servers as well. So the first one that popped up for us is 22, and that's SSH. And what we're looking for here is any information that we can find on the TCP side of things, right? Because we do have a UDP scan that I ran, and I'm going to show that to you real quick before we really dive in. So the UDP scan is very similar to the scan that I ran here, the first scan. What we're looking for is we ran the SU switch instead of the SS switch, and we're just trying to see if we can find anything interesting in here. So we see RPC bind is open and NetBIOS is open. So we kind of already know that from our other scan here. We can see that we knew RPC bind was open and NetBIOS is open. So this isn't news to us, right? And you've got these closed ports showing. You're going to see that sometimes in the scan. You can just go ahead and ignore those. We're only concerned with what's open. So since our open ports here are matching, we're just going to go ahead and go with a detailed scan on the TCP side of things. If we did find something interesting on here that didn't show up on the TCP side, maybe we want to do a more intense scan here on a staged version and see what we can figure out. But because we didn't, we're just going to stick to TCP here. So first things first with SSH. So what information do we see? We can find the version here. This is probably what's going to be the most interesting. We can kind of Google this or do a search exploit and see if we can find anything interesting on it. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go into a web browser here, and we can just go to Google. And it looks like I'm having a connection issue here. Okay, sorry about that. So now that we have Google up, let's go ahead and try searching for this. We can search OpenSSH. I like to type in exploit at the end of it. See if we can find anything. Normally, if there was a good exploit for it, you're going to see an exploit DB link here within the first few links, and I don't see that. we can always come into here and do some research on the CVE details. You're going to probably want to look for a score that's really high, like say this score here. And this is only a denial of service, so this doesn't really help us get in. Here's one that's a code overflow. So this may be something that we might want to look into and see if we can use that to get into a machine. You might want to click on it and read about it and see if there's exploits out there. So it looks like it affects OpenBSD. We're not sure if we're even running OpenBSD on our machine yet, so that's more enumeration that we're going to have to do. So we can tab back and kind of look and see what we're running here. Let's see if it gave us any kind of OS information. So it shows us that we're running a Linux 2.4. So it doesn't say that we're running OpenBSD, so that's probably not a good exploit. I'll tell you now that SSH exploits are few and far between, at least what I've found in the scope of this course. So you're not going to really find a lot of information here. There's a few other things you're going to want to enumerate, mainly from the terminal. So if we come into here, and I'm going to make this bigger so you guys can see it. So if we come in here and we want to do a few things, we can look at a search exploit. And what that does is it basically just scans for any type of vulnerability or exploit. I like to search full first. You're likely not going to find anything. Sometimes you might want to take out OpenSSH, try to search a version. The less information you put, the more likely you're going to get other things thrown in here. See WordPress, PHP, MyFAQ. So you want to be a little specific, but sometimes the exploit itself isn't very specific. So I don't see any OpenSSH in here. You could also search exploit for OpenSSH and see if there's anything for our version. So there's a 2.x, that might be something here because we are running 2.9, I believe. So these are things we might want to look into and do some research and see if we can find more information about. But I haven't found much, I'll tell you that. So the other thing that you might want to do is you might want to try connecting to the machine on SSH. So you can SSH and then just type in the IP address. So it's saying we don't have a matching cipher here. Okay, so when you see something like this, what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to actually put the cipher in that it's requesting. So I'm going to go ahead and use this cipher that they're showing here. This is the first time I've ever seen this, at least in this scope. So I wouldn't expect to see this too much. This should be a one-off here. So let's go ahead and try it again. Okay, so now that we have this here, we can see that we're connecting and we're trying, we could try a password attack here. That's not really an option we want to do at this point. I would save that for a last resort, because if you're attacking a system, you might throw off some sort of alarms if you do some sort of brute force here. You could always try like an empty password. So that's not it. You could try Tor, and then if after 2 attempts, I would just kill it. I wouldn't try it, especially in a real world situation. For the OSCP, you'd be fine trying a million passwords if you want, but I like to keep it practical as well. So I would stay away from brute forcing anything unless you have to, especially here in this situation. So if there's any sort of logs and you don't get in, and an admin can see that you've been attempting to attack their SSH, they're going to be aware that somebody's trying to get into their system. So just food for thought there. And that's really it. So SSH isn't really a gold mine. It's something that you're going to use a lot in the course, but for other reasons. Usually you're going to find a password stored somewhere else, and you might have information that might let you try that SSH password or username and attempt that, but just going in the dark, SSH shouldn't be your first method of attack. You want to look at something that's more valuable and has known exploits. There's nothing in our scan that's really that juicy, nothing that stands out right away. So sometimes you'll see special services or something that's running on there that you might find interesting, maybe like a SQL database or some kind of special program or an FTP server that's specific. As of right now, there's nothing on here that I'm seeing that's that interesting. So I would look at port 80, port 443, and especially port 139 here. And we're going to cover that here in the next couple videos. So the next video is going to go right down the list, and we're going to cover port 80 and see if we can find anything there that might be exploitable. So until then, my name is Heath Adams, and I thank you for joining me.